led by Indigenous leaders or Black or people of color communities across this country, coast to coast to coast. Our strategic grant making is primarily into remote northern and rural communities. Over 90% of our grant making goes to Indigenous communities. And just really thrilled to be here as well. Victor interviewed me a couple months ago and said, hey, you should come on this. And just getting over a flu. So I'm just delighted to also be co-conspiring with this wonderful group and to meet you, Ryan.
Hey, much appreciated, Joanna. Oh, Joanna. And I'll go to Jean-Marc next. You want to give us an overview of the work you're currently doing?
Yeah, bonjour, I'm Jean-Marc. I'm the president of Philanthropic Foundations Canada. I'm talking to you today from a small village north of Ottawa on unceded Anishinaabe territory. And the mission of PFC, that's as everybody in the network calls it, is to strengthen Canadian philanthropy and all of us as diversity to support a more just, inclusive society, that the world that we're going to build in together. So the key message is this is no longer your grandfather's philanthropy work, and it's a real process of transformation that we're in. And the second, I really enjoyed my interaction with Victor a month ago now, so I couldn't say no to him. Say you must be here today. So that we do not have the luxury of despair in this time of crisis, and that that sense of urgency but also of hope and of love when we actually work together on our complex issues. We don't always win, but that process is critical at this. It's critical at any time, but at this juncture is essential. So I'm very glad to be part of this conversation today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And we'll also go to Maryann just to hear about the current work that you're doing with PLCAS.
Well, thank you, Ryan. And I too am really thrilled to be here with this group. I am the current CEO of the Children's Aid Foundation and hope to share a little bit more about our work further on in the panel. But I think it's important to share also that I am a white, straight, cisgendered, neurodiverse woman, and I've been partnered with my best friend for 30 years. He's my polar opposite, so it's a lot of fun at our house. We have 2 daughters and a black lab named Jetson, and I've worked in the sector for 37 years. I'm so privileged and thrilled to work with the Peel Children's Aid Foundation. It's incredible work, and I'm looking forward to sharing more. I also have a micro business in organizational health and fundraising called the Medalist Group, and I'm an author of a book about rethinking, reimagining, and co-creating a new social impact sector, and I'm excited to learn from all of you today.
Wonderful. And we'll definitely get the conversation started. And Joanna, I'd love to start with you just to give a bit more context to the way you're approaching the mission of improving philanthropy going into the future in Canada.
I muted myself. Okay. One group I'm with, you have to give $1 for every time you're on mute. So
I like that.
I'll make a donation. Yeah, I'll make a donation. Yeah, I mean, I think all of us here are wanting to see major shifts in philanthropy in this country. And one of 7 of Makeway's priorities is to try to make the charitable and philanthropic sector much more equitable and to shift power. And so one of the ways, you know, let me say I see kind of 4 or 5 tensions that are right now in the sector that maybe we could speak to. On one hand, we are seeing way more trust-based philanthropy. Trust-based philanthropy is unrestricted, or the organization, and it's applied as according to, well, seeing a lot of philanthropy that's like metrics. It's this project, it's got this amount of time, and it's highly that, particularly with some new philanthropy that comes in. I like to say some of the tech bros like this kind of approach to philanthropy. But on the good side, again, you're seeing a tension between way more flexible philanthropy, which is being delivered through donor advised funds or funding collaboratives, community advised funds. That's something that Makeway hosts a lot of. But then you're also seeing very locked up endowed foundations. You know, somebody's come into a ton of wealth and they're lock it all up in an endowment, and it's just constrained, right?
Mm.
Third thing, we're seeing a lot more money going to community-led initiatives, and stuff that's, you know, being driven and defined by communities of color, Indigenous communities, women. You're seeing a lot more at this. You're still seeing a ton of money going into hospitals, universities, you know, the names on buildings. So that's still there. And then the fourth one is you are seeing a lot more money in the future going into systems change, root causes, which is kind of what we all need to be doing to shift the power and changing the future of our planet and our societies. And then there's also highly risk averse philanthropy, you know, very charitable based, just want to tackle some of the problems at the surface, but don't actually want to get to root causes. And last but not least, I want to say the positive side is that there's way more philanthropy. If any of you end up going to the Philanthropic Foundations of Canada conference, what the demographic conference was a few years ago compared to what it was a year ago, way more people of color, way more Indigenous leaders working for running of driving a major philanthropic change. There still, however, is pale, male, and stale philanthropy. So this transformation is happening, but I think these are the trends that I think we can see there. These are the tensions, the 5 tensions that I see.
We appreciate that perspective. And Liban, actually, I'll go to you next just to give us a more rounded context on the work that you already have been doing to move the needle and where you feel this mission of improving philanthropy in Canada is going in the future.
Yeah, because I every morning when you work in philanthropy, you get to choose which side of the bed you wake up on. You can wake up on the optimistic or the pessimistic side of philanthropy. To Jean-Marc's surprise, I think philanthropy is often misunderstood as a phantom echo. I had a professor that I often reference, Ross Rudolph, and he used to tell me about this concept of one of those, right? My philanthropy is not the philanthropy of others, right? And others aren't philanthropy of my own. My philanthropy is she's been the only person rooted in a Western country with stable, provides a substantial part of her living paycheck and grants and provides remittance back home. Folks on this visions or healthcare supplies or money, that's philanthropy, right? It's a love of humanity, but more than the love, it's the responsibility, the sense of responsibility that one possesses to return what they've been given, right? I often refer to philanthropy not as what you give, but what you return. We all have benefited from the social relationships that we have. And my philanthropic practice is to be able to return that which I've been given and that which I owe. And on that topic, I think much is still owed in the Canadian context of philanthropy. Much is owed to the labor and unpaid labor of women. Much is paid to the Indigenous communities whose land, resources, we have exploited to generate wealth and then have not returned. Much is owed to communities that contribute taxes that underpin the operationalization of the philanthropic sector, but then who do not then receive the benefit. And you're probably thinking, my goodness, you said, well, the optimism comes in this. The Philanthropic Foundations of Canada recognized this and was through folks like Jean-Marc, one of the most ardent supporters of the establishment of equitable philanthropic movements in this country, like the Indigenous Peoples Resiliency Fund and the Foundation for Black Communities. So what I'm saying is that philanthropic leaders today, right, as Jean-Marc says, this isn't the philanthropy of our grandparents. They recognize the gaps and they're moving towards them, right? And I recognize that this, so I think it's important to state this for posterity, right? Jean-Marc can point to this in the future. You said something nicely, Ben. Don't take it back. But folks like Joanna are the future of philanthropy as well. Joanna could have set up as a foundation instead, would they recognize the gap that doesn't permit others to participate in the philanthropy. And so by creating intermediaries that allow organizations qualified termed to be able to get access to the resources to do the work is the foundation, right? Like the infrastructure is philanthropy. And I think that many more Makeways, or the expansion of Makeway, is going to be a good thing for the country. We also see in the area of what Maryann is doing, right? Our direct work of initiatives supporting populations like Black communities in Peel who are unfit in the welfare system. So I talked about three things I think are the future. They're no longer happy prime time center stage issues like PFC does. There are leaders like Joanna that are there to say, we're going to find the gaps, and until we find the policy solution, we'll just be happy with the.
Not perhaps as dramatically as some of us also would hope, but there's a pathway now that for genuine partnership to emerge between philanthropic foundations and their not-for-profit partners to sustain this kind of work. So and now we're going to be tracking the rules just came out in December, and we're going to be tracking what the impact of that is. Is that actually deploying? Are we broadening philanthropy and are we still having the same blind spots a few years from now? So there was a significant impediment that has now been removed. So these two changes together are the most significant philanthropic rules in Canada over the last 25 years, and this is like happened over the last 3 years. So it does not address everything in terms of some issues that Joanna and Liban have raised about the kind of the power relationship and where is it going. It's true that Joanna pointed out that most of the money still goes to hospitals and universities. It's declining, the proportion is declining, but still the biggest chunk of money. But what I find interesting is the increasing number of philanthropists less interested to put their name on a building and want to know what's actually happening inside the building and address issues that of power, of diversity, of changing the nature of this institutional relationship between this institution and community. And so there's some very interesting work that's taking place where governments are not present, the market forces are not going to supply a solution, and that traditional individual donors tend not to, because there's a lot of kind of core support that's required, not be very supportive. And another trend, I just pick up the latest data from Imagine Canada and StatsCan, the total amount of individual donors and the total amount of foundational donors is now more or less the same. That was not the case. Individual donors were much bigger pot of money for charities and not for profit. Now they both around $11 billion. And with the transfer of wealth that's happening, the potential for more institutional giving through a foundation or DAF mechanism is real. There's other form of giving, as Liban just mentioned, in terms of remittances. That's very, very important and not captured in this kind of official data. And it's important that philanthropy is never perceived as a business of the rich. It's everybody's business. So that it's about building the kind of society that we all want. And yes, there's a relief part to that work. Some people not necessarily addressing the root causes. I come from that world. I work in humanitarian assistance, mostly in Africa, for a good chunk of my professional life. That's important work. There's also work of sustaining important social services, and Maryann will talk to that, no doubt, in a second. That's you can't get. Some of it they should be better supported by the state, but there's some element where government struggle to be innovative, and perhaps philanthropy can play a very helpful role. And then the transformative role of new that you want to address root causes that are stopping us from being the kind of society that we want. So all of that is legitimate areas of philanthropy.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'd love to.
How you do it is there's a lot to learn in terms of improving our collective practice. So I've talked enough.
We're definitely going to dig into that a bit later. So I appreciate you bringing it up. But Maryann, I did want to get your perspective on this mission at hand and how you're approaching it, and your views on the future of philanthropy in Canada, or the current state.
Sure, thank you. Well, I agree with everything that's already been said. And I think, coming from a very small organization, which is where most of us in the sector sit, right? And an organization that feels really deeply the inequity, not only in the world in terms of how it impacts the folks we work alongside, but the inequity in the sector itself. Our vision really is, and I'm going to say this, when I need inspiration, I look to Joanna and I look to Makeway. I read everything on that website. I look at the Equality Fund, and I look at the language, right, that talks about moving impact, right, moving dollars in a way that says, forever, we have funded in Ontario a healthcare center through federal and provincial payments, and billions of philanthropic dollars, child welfare, and other organizations, other sectors need their piece of that. And I'm not suggesting that we take it from the pie that already exists. There is an abundance of opportunity out there. So I envision more of a shift that says, why not? Why are we not seeing that happen? And the child welfare system has made lots of mistakes, as most systems in this country have, right? And we are owning up to them. In Peel region specifically, I'm a terrible person with numbers, but I know that 99% of the work that the society does happens in the homes of the families that we work with. Our representation in terms of Indigenous children, Black children, children of color is very, very low. So we are being very intentional about paying closely attention to the things that we need to, based on where we've gone wrong in the past. And so I think our vision more than anything is to see a shift so that, I get a little, I'll talk. I don't want to go too deeply into the alternative minimum tax thing, because that could be a whole panel discussion. But sure, I'm going to be honest. That's going to affect exactly 2 people who give to our organization, and I care about that. I care about it a lot, because they're 2 people who give at a higher level. They're on a percentage basis. They're giving a lot of money to our tiny little organization. But from an equity perspective, I have a little bit of an issue when big organizations go out and say that they're speaking on behalf of the entire sector sector when they say that they do not support, you know, an alternative minimum tax. So, these are the kinds of things that kind of go through my mind. And oh, thanks, Joanna. I think we're always going to have a little bit of that kind of tension between, you know, trying to support major donors, trying to open our doors in a way that brings in a diverse and broad-based level of support, and says, hey, you know, if you're sitting on billions of dollars in the healthcare system, in reserves, and we're over here struggling, and everything we fund is about addressing a social determinant of health. It's about preventing folks from ending up in the healthcare system. Think bigger, right? Think of us. Think of organizations like us, because there's a lot of little organizations out there who shouldn't be suffering the way that they are. And I'll get off my soapbox for a few minutes.
Hey, we will bring the soapbox back in a sec, but I appreciate that, Maryann. And Joanna, to kind of go to you and get your perspectives on what collaborations or current initiatives could help amplify the current work that you're doing at Makeway.
Yeah, you're so kind. You just want to bring it back to our organizations. I want to say first one thing about, I think, your audience, right? And some advice for your audience. Because I'm assuming the audience mostly is in the nonprofit sector. Am I correct? Or social enterprises that are also they're fund seekers. Is that fair enough to say, Ryan?
That would be a good chunk, yeah, especially social business.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, because we're all part of the system, and to change the system, we all have our role to play. And one of the things that we need to do in order to change philanthropy is to move it from a donor-centric system to a community-centered system. And one of the ways in which we uphold a donor-centric system is that our organizations we try to mold our proposals into what we think the funder wants to hear.
Yes, big time.
And we are like, okay, I'm going to read their Twitter account. I'm going to read their, you know, any socials they've done. I'm going to try to interpret all of their website, or, you know, I'm going to try to meet them for lunch and second guess what they're actually thinking. And then I'm going to try to turn myself into a pretzel in order to, no, we've got to stop doing that. We've got to stop doing that, because that just reinforces this so-called business of the rich, right? No, we have to put forward our mission, our theory of change, the needs that we have. If we're going to push forward into a trust-based, community-led approach to philanthropy, where money gets transferred to leaders and to communities who know the problems, and who know the problems are totally integrated. Everything is integrated, right? Climate, health, youth leadership, economy, you know, political upheaval, all of these things are interconnected. So we desperately need an approach whereby communities or organizations can receive money to advance their mission, because they know all the ways in which those things are integrated. So I just wanted to make sure that there's a shout out to all the people on the call to really start putting forward their whole strategic plan, their whole mission. I'm looking for core funding. You guys need to come along with us and see that if you want to have impact, it's got to be multi-year core funding for that. So at Makeway, we work with a lot of foundations, a lot of philanthropists in these funding collaboratives. And we all come together and we're listening to communities, how are seeing the system, how they're seeing the needs in their communities. And we host 8 or 9 of these funding collaboratives, which is really a peer-to-peer approach for funders to also, it actually mitigates risk, so that they're all in this together. Yeah. We're all in this together. Some of these are pooled funds, some of them aren't, but it's a shared learning approach. So that's one way in which philanthropy is trying to kind of break down some of these systemic barriers, but also flip the power, trying to flip the power so that communities are defining the long just to learn, in a very reciprocal relationship in order to make change happen.
I love that. And I'm curious, because Liban, I'd love to get your thoughts on the wrestling of power from those that have it, and your thoughts on what collaborations or initiatives could help ample work that you're currently doing.
When I think about this question, it takes me back to the other one, like around what is the future of philanthropy? The future of philanthropy, and if we're going to think about, I wouldn't say wrestling power, but creating a more just, fair, and equitable philanthropic space, which is, I think, a common desire among those that find themselves in the space. I think generally that's a desire that exists. The how we get there and the pace that we get there is often what is disputed. But one of the things is, and I'll talk about three. One is representation. When it comes to dollars and cents, foundations are often led by very small teams. And those teams are, to Joanna's point, pale, male, and stale, right? It's still very much a snow-capped mountain. The boards are very much the same. I would say that has been probably one of the hardest things to move along, because even those boards and those employees are often hard to know. That it's a really opaque system. So many of these places don't have websites, right? Some of these foundations are family or individual. They have a genesis based on a particular family or organization. And so you're picking from that family member or that family network, right? Or you're picking from the company. For example, a really wonderful organization that recently started, a foundation that started, did so because of the demutualization of a big insurance company. So when you pick from the senior leadership of that insurance company, they're bound to look one way, right? So I think changing that over time is going to have to be a necessary part of the future of philanthropy. And when you now begin to have folks who look like those who are the end of the benefit, right, versus some altruistic provider of the benefit, they make very different decisions, right? You begin to now see that an organization wanting to pay for healthcare supports to ensure that a workforce primarily made of women can get access to eye care for their children. It's an investment in the sector, and it's worthwhile impact. You may not make such a decision if you have a bunch of dudes who have no appreciation for those costs or that lived experience. So I think critical get to this fair and more just industry that we're looking, or a sector that we're looking for. Number two, I think we need to begin to better understand what foundations are. At best, they're change makers, where we're plowing tons and tons of money into meaningful and worthwhile projects. At worst, philanthropic foundations are glorified investment machines. I'll tell you what I mean by that. For those of us on the call, not all foundations, but a significant majority of them have what is called, where the capital held in this investment and it's from those investments that is then distributed. As Jean-Marc mentioned, that distribution requirement now is 5%. Well, if you look at a whole pie, if I'm only giving away 5%, that means at a minimum, I'm always maintaining 95% of my investments, which are not going into the community. Well, that's fine, because I'm generating 5% in perpetuity. That makes sense. Well, what if that 95% was actually doing more harm than that 5% was doing good? Right? What if I was giving 5% to invest in the protection of marshlands in Western Canada, but then I was spending a part of my 95% investing in banks which is destroying these same marshlands. The cognitive dissonance. That's a really simplistic example, and it are our philanthropic sector is not that simplistic, but it's to give you a bit of a sense of the because when you tell someone you can run the homework club, but then you don't provide them the tools to run the homework club, it's like giving someone a wheel and no car, right? It makes no sense. And so I think those things that I would talk as need addressed, those are just three key areas. From a I'll talk about one thing that's already happening. Around the philanthropic sector, there are numerous, and sorry for taking up so much time. I know that my colleagues, I'll be brief on this. We have collaborative funding networks already. There are Indigenous funders networks. There are women funders networks. There are youth funders networks. There are environmental funders networks. I think these things are really good practices that we both signify, raise awareness in, and better support. And that allows for more pooled funding, which allows $1 to 4 or 5, right? You get to magnify the support. You also now get a chance to say, hey, I funded an organization doing this really good work. Can we think about sharing with that project with another set of funders who can take that on? That allows for return on investment. That allows us not to throw dollars at really good projects that have no survivability, right? So these networks of common and like-minded funders on shared issues is that we could benefit from. My colleague Rebecca Darwin works with an organization called Philanthropy Together, and they talk a lot about these shared and pooled funding opportunities, and that's something that has become more likely now because of some of the policy changes related to not the disbursement quota. Jean-Marc, remind me, the non-qualified
donees.
The non-qualified change to become more a really important tool in the future, because it's going to encourage only funding what they care about individually, but thinking about how to work collaboratively with those who have similar interests, and then greater impact.
I love that. And we're seeing it with the work that the Foundation for Black Communities does. And Jean-Marc, would love to get your thoughts on what collaborations in the community or initiatives are missing that could really amplify some of what you were talking about earlier, but how do you feel we can amplify that work?
Yeah, so I'll follow up on what Liban said about representation, and we know that a more diverse and representative organization they achieve greater impact because they understand the context, and so is the sector changing, the philanthropic sector changing quick enough? There's a bill in Parliament right now that, if approved, if passed, will ask every charities in this country, including foundations, to provide an annual report of the composition of their board. So that we are able to take place. And I've been in the sector for 5 years. So and for those foundation that have staff, which is a minority of foundation, that within the PFC network, definitely there's been a significant change in the staffing composition. At the board, less so, but they also seen for kind of these family foundation. Some of them have brought in community voices on the board. Others have established a program committee of community members that do the peer review, the recommendation, and do the hard work of doing that triage and developing the quality of the partnership that's key for. That's all of the power, the elements that are in the relationship. Probably not. I think it allows for a much richer conversation and more humility from the donor perspective. And Joanne's point about our role as trustees of these foundations is to ensure they achieve their charitable purpose. They receive a government support through the tax credit to establish this foundation. we have to ensure that they actually fulfill this a charitable purpose, and it's in the service of the public good, in the service of the community. And you have to do the hard work yourself to understand the context. If you can't, you make sure you got the voices around your board table in the staff that do this other understanding the context of an issue, and working with your partners to have a sense of what you can achieve together. And it's easy to say, and I recognize that I've been on the other side asking for money, so I turn myself to a pretzel. I do have a experience of that. Also have the experience of
Ryan and Maryann, can I just jump in on this point, just to build on it, just really quickly, because both Liban and Jean-Marc are speaking to this principle about transparency and or the lack thereof within philanthropy in this country. And so the fact that this bill is coming forward does then create a little bit more transparency in terms of the makeup of these boards. But we have a much bigger dilemma in terms of the billions and billions and billions that are sitting inside foundations that nobody knows about, or the billions and billions and billions that are sitting inside donor advised funds institutions. You know, so you've got, you know, big banks that basically are talking to their clients, they're very, very wealthy clients, and then they say, oh, you might want to set up a donor advised fund, it gets tax treated, you get it, and you get a charitable receipt, and you just park your money inside that bank and it never gets touched, and nobody knows about it. Wow. Nobody knows the name of it, nobody knows the name of how much is in there, and nobody knows how it's invested. And so, you know, that's the issue here that we've got to deal with. I mean, any of your audience here who's trying to figure out where is the money for the work that I want to do, it's pretty hard to find it, right? And I think more of us are trying to figure out how to take the lid off of that to say, where is the money, how to influence it in order to make it more transparent. Our initiative that we're going to be focusing on is around investment transparency. So we've started a project that we're going to go more public on. Well, now that we're recording on this, but you know, around investment transparency of foundations. But I think all of us are speaking to a very, very key point here around transparency in philanthropy is the secret to transformation.
Love that. I appreciate the perspective. And Maryann, would love to get your input on collaborations that could be done with PLCAF. I know typically as community, we see CAS over there and we try not to engage until something bad happens. So I'm curious your thoughts on how we could collaborate and create better initiatives to support and amplify the work that you're doing.
It's such a great, so thanks for asking it, Joanne. I'd like to talk to you later because we have, you know, in Ontario, I'm just going to speak about what I know here in this province. There are approximately 50 child welfare, children's aid societies. A dozen or so of those are Indigenous led and Indigenous agencies. And I recently did some work to say, you know, where is the money going now? So I took out all the government funding and I said, what's left here? So in the province of Ontario, we raise between 50 organizations, about 20. In Peel region alone, the child welfare system is underfunded $25 to $30 million every year in Peel region alone. I don't know the number for the rest of the province. And these are numbers that, you know, the government themselves will say, yes, that this is a truth. So we're raising $21 million. The vast majority of that is where? In Southwestern Ontario and Toronto, of course. The North is vastly underrepresented. Indigenous age of the 12 or 13 Indigenous led agencies, I think really there was 2 that had any non-government funding, and one of those was Native Child and Family Services here in Toronto, right? That's a great thing. But when I say that, you know, I know there is way more pie out there, and Joanna has just spoken to it. I encourage everybody on this call, if you're not already reading the Future of Good podcasts and their publications, they're putting this kind of information out into the world, right? They're telling us what's going on out there. But we are, as small organizations, and I think this is one of the biggest struggles. When you are small, you don't have unless this is absolutely all you do with your time, because your children are now grown, you just don't have time to invest in learning all that you need to learn in order to do the kind of systems that Liban just spoke to. Like when you spoke, I was like, yeah, nodding my head, because yeah, we need to be looking at the whole little circle, right? Where we have to follow the money. If we're a feminist organization and we claim to be in the feminist space, but we're not doing gender lens investing with our reserves, well, that's just wrong, right? We need to, and that again, not to do the sign, but that again is why organizations like Way and the Equality Fund see that they have brought philanthropy in Canada through the donations both received from Mackenzie Scott. I mean, that's big news, right? That's going to make a huge difference philanthropic sector as a whole, because those organizations who are themselves moving money have received these kinds of gifts. So I think we talk about change, right? Change happens at the individual level, it happens at the organizational level, it happens at the systems level, and we need to be looking at all of those things, right? As an individual, I need to be able to say, yep, I am racist, sexist, homophobic. I am all of those things because I was raised in these systems. So my job as an individual is to rage against that every single minute of my day, rage against the systems in which I was raised. On an organizational level, I need to align the work we're doing with those same values around equity. And then I always need to be looking at the larger system and trying to figure out, how do we affect change as individuals, as organizations, and across these systems. So I think we have a lot to do. And I'm also always inspired by some of the folks around this table. And I'm seeing people in the audience who are really doing incredible work. So to all of you, thank you, because I think we're really starting to see that shift, as Joanna says, towards a focus on community philanthropy and community-based work. And so I think that's phenomenal.
That. And Liban, I would love to go to you next, just to understand a bit more about the priorities that you're now working on. I know being part of FFBC, the Foundation for Black Communities, it feels like so much work has already been done, but I'm curious to know your thoughts on the future of the foundation and priorities that you're working on now.
So I'll give a bit of a teaser. We launched our first inaugural national grant program called the Black Ideas Grant, or better known as the BIG grant. And we just concluded our assessment process. And we're about to fund over 100 incredible organizations across this country, coast to coast to coast, with nearly $9.2 million going out of the door. Mm-hmm. This is probably the single largest redistribution of capital by a Black community institution to Black communities in the history of Canada. That's something worth celebrating. And we're incredibly grateful for all of the applicants that came in. But I can share something. When is this going to be published, by the way? Is it going to go up right away? I'll be a bit I'll hold back a little bit. Say there's a massive story to be told about the number of projects that went unfunded.
Gotcha.
Right. The demand that we saw was extraordinary. Mm-hmm. We weren't surprised, but we were certainly overwhelmed by the reaction of just how many incredible projects we were able to fund.
Gotcha.
And what that made us realize is when we hear from others, well, no Black organizations apply to us.
Really?
That really calls into question that point.
Yes.
That there just aren't Black organizations, right? And so our work over the next little while areas that is for Black communities across the different regions of Canada, and to think about how do we then begin to link other funders in the private foundation sector to those issues that both they care about and that the community is asking for. So we don't want to be the singular Black communities. What we want to ensure is that the network of PFC, the network of CFC, the network of Makeways are all being called in, invited in, really wanting to be very clear, not one communities, though the challenge and the accusation was put out there, frankly, and rightfully so because of the funding patterns, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. When called, these organizations have always stepped up and said, what is our role? We don't want to dictate, invite us in and let us know how we can get involved. So I want to shout out members of the Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, shout out Makeway, and even organizations like CASPO, who are always ready to support and work alongside Black communities. But so the collaborative effort next is, how do we begin to layer on additional investment into the organizations that we've invested in and those that we weren't able to need it? That's number one. Number two, there's a lot of infrastructure needed to bind this network and ecosystem of Black communities together. There's research insights that need to be drawn to help actually improve the interventions that many organizations want to see. Too many of us right now are relying on imitation or intuition, right? Our lived experience is often driving the kind of intervention we want to see, but there's enough information and data out there on what already works that I think we could be better utilizing and informing so that our lived experience can be actually improved and layered on top of just a hardcore statistical efficacy. So those are the kind of things we're doing. We're going to start thinking about how to get further layered investment on those we weren't able to support and those that we did, and then thinking about the social infrastructure and data requirements of this sector to do even better, more impactful intervention. Those are the two things that we're doing. A few more that I'm kind of being a bit coy about, but we're going to make those announcements. And don't try to scoop my own stuff.
But I appreciate you being able to shed light on that. I'm curious, do you know the breadth of how many applications came in? Because I know you're not on the front lines, like seeing them come in, but do you know approximately across Canada?
We know the number, and it's in the thousands, and we're going to wait to hear. We're going to wait to sort of share the breakdown of where they came from, the issues that they asked for. Is not surprising. We expect. But there's a lot to be learned around the data, and we're looking forward to sharing that with our partners in the funding space and letting them know what we're seeing, what we're learning.
Yeah, appreciate that. And Joanna, would love to kind of hear from you, not just the priorities and what you're currently working on, but how you're seeing the future of philanthropy shift, because you're shedding a lot of light on hidden pockets of the philanthropic. That word is going to destroy the industry and where in. So I'm curious, are there any priorities that you're currently working on that you'd like to share?
You know, we're a public foundation, so we raise money to give money, right? So we're always trying to connect communities with philanthropic players. So it is all the things that we've said. How do we use our networks? How do we use our spaces that we can convene or that we're part of to actually leverage more dollars and to shake the money tree? I think you are going to see, I also am going to be coy about a campaign that we're building up. But I guess there's something else that I do want to say that might be relevant, is that we were the lucky beneficiaries of a program called Interweave that used to sit at McConnell Foundation.
Right.
And which has been providing capacity strengthening supports to nonprofit organizations across this country for about 10 years. And so the current president of McConnell says, we shouldn't be doing this anymore. You guys should be doing this. So we've just inherited it.
Nice.
And so we're going to be trying to provide increasing number of capacity supports to nonprofit organizations, particularly those that are, equity seeking, that have been marginalized from a lot of the resources that exist in this country. But we also want to kind of put out a map of where is the money for capacity strengthening for organizations, because people have it in different places, but they're not necessarily that. So I think that's to your audience of something that you can look forward to. Makeway. No, I think it's a big lift for us to change the rules of the game, so that there's more financial flows, that there are more capital flows that are flexible, that are getting out of endowments, that are moving into communities, that, you know, I think that there's more transparency so that we can understand where it is. Yeah, and just what other collaborations we can have with Setsi, I'm excited about. So back to you.
Hey, really appreciate, and we're excited too. And not to say, like, you really answered, and each one of you have answered kind of where the future, what you feel the future of philanthropy is going to be. But in closing thoughts, are there any calls to action? And Joanna, I'll stay with you just to get us started. Things that us as the audience and community can do to really support what you're working on.
I mean, I'm going to repeat my my thing about don't be asking for tiny project-based funding that sits you in a box and that continues to reinforce donor-centric philanthropy. Get out there, ask for money that's core, flexible, and multi-year. Just as Liban said, we have to all keep asking for that to change the system.
Love that. And Maryann, I'd love to go to you next just to get your thoughts on where the future of philanthropy is going, and also some calls to action on what we as a community can do to strengthen your work.
Yeah, well, I think it is going in the direction of trust-based philanthropy, community-led philanthropy. So I'm really optimistic about the future. I think more donors, more philanthropists are understanding the need to fund collaborative efforts. When you look at numbers that came from the Ontario Nonprofit Network this year for the number of organizations closing down, we're like, in Ontario, we are in a full-blown crisis as a sector. So, the need for us to collaborate at every level is essential. And so as a foundation, that's one of the things that we are trying to do, is build a collaborative effort in Ontario for the child welfare space. We're going out on some limbs. I'm wearing my do good, getting good trouble t-shirt. I mean, that's it. We're all about getting good trouble. But I think on the things that concern me deeply, first of all, we need to stop having organizations suggest, whether they're academic organizations or they're community-based organizations or whoever, or they're fundraising organizations, suggest that they represent the sector, because I don't think anybody yet represents the full sector. I think they need to say we represent, and as do others. There needs to be an and in that sentence. And I think we need to pay really close attention to organizational health and culture, because I think ego, I think poor leadership, I think toxic workplaces and toxic leaders are sucking the life out of all of the beautiful people I know who do this work. And just this week, I heard about another amazing human being who has moved over to the corporate side. And she's a huge loss to our sector. She's a great gain for that organization. She'll work on the CSR side. But, we couldn't pay her, well, not us, but, the sector wasn't paying her what she was worth. And so we're losing good people, and we need to stop doing that. So that's my biggest area of concern, because I think there's so many smart people like those who are sitting here who are understanding the need to collaborate, work together, break down silos. And that's the future in terms of raising money in this country anyway.
Love that. I appreciate your perspective. And Jean-Marc, we'd love to go to you to get your thoughts on where the future of philanthropy is going, and also some calls to action for our audience that we can do to support the work that you're already doing.
So I'd like to echo that. I mean, the sense of crisis in the sector is real. The latest ONN report paints a very dire picture. On the positive side, the COVID has acted as an accelerator of a move away from kind of short-term project-based to more program, core, multi-year support. The foundations that have moved into that space with the end of COVID have not reverted back to a project-based approach. This is the good news. There's still a lot to be done in terms of truly be a kind of a community-led philanthropy and strong partnership that could go through hard times together. If the ecosystem evolve rapidly, I see the rise not only of the Foundation for Black Community, but several Indigenous-led, Indigenous-serving communities across the country. Some of them want to become members of PFC. This will transform PFC in a way of doing approaching philanthropy, and not saying, oh, we have now these indigenous that interested in serving, they're going to take care of the indigenous issues. Is our issues, but we're going to learn a great deal from those working in that space, in the relationship, in the trust they have. I think it's quite telling that Liban's there's many organizations saying they're not knocking on the other doors. They need to knock on the other doors and for facilitating these kinds of relationship with the philanthropic sector, so that in a few years from now, when we do a follow-up of the underfunded report, we get a very different picture. That's the aspiration. Well, we're not there yet. So that our Kenyan philanthropy truly reflects the diversity of our society. So this movement, we need to accelerate the pace.
100%. And Liban, I would love for you to close us out with your thoughts on where the future of philanthropy is going and some call to action for us as the audience and those watching to support and amplify your work.
Yeah, I'll say the future of philanthropy in this country is one where Black communities are not recipients, but are seen as benefactors as well as beneficiaries. I think we're going to have to do a greater job of recognizing, celebrating, and amplifying the philanthropic practices of Black communities that are indigenous to Black communities, whether it's Block Sand, whether it's Susu, whether it's our own giving. And it goes beyond cash. It goes to talent and time. Black community and members are often providing their time and their talents across this country, not only to Black communities, but to all communities, whether you're working at food, whether you're volunteering at food shelters, whether you're providing homework support, whether you're doing any number of activities that improve the social fabric and climate of our community. So I think the future of philanthropy really looks like the present of philanthropy in the Black community, and that is us continuing to support each other, because we know that the future of Black communities is in our own hands. It looks like it's a self-determined, future-driven by us, for us, as always. And also, it looks like a greater recognition of the true allyship that exists, that we probably can tend to overlook because we're always in the midst of a crisis. So you don't appreciate the good when you're thinking about how to solve a problem. And so I think the future is really thinking about strengthening and amplifying the partnerships and the allyship that already exist. And frankly, if I can end maybe on a little bit of a pessimistic note, the future of philanthropy is ensuring that the philanthropic sector isn't seen as the be-all and end-all. Private or public philanthropy does not replace good public policy. I repeat, private and public philanthropy does not replace good public policy. You cannot look at organizations to solve social problems. They cannot, they will not, and they should not. So we do have to think about our other institutions of civil society, which include government, that are really more truly responsible for filling the gaps that philanthropic foundations and philanthropy often thinks it can have solve, but finds itself having to force sometimes to try to plug the hole. That's not the responsibility here. So I think it's important to just make sure we're framing the right role and the right position of philanthropy in this country. And I think we can do a much better job of not pretending like we're the solution for all things.
Excellent. And I feel like that's a key note to end on. I really appreciate your time, everyone's time that has been here and present. And again, to your leadership and each of the panelists, we do want to close the way that we began this conversation. Lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. And we acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders stand on as we build, share, and learn together for collective liberation, sovereignty. Really appreciate you adding this enlightened conversation to the People's Social Impact Conference. And again, looking forward to ongoing conversations. Like, this is just the genesis, and looking forward to continuing your work and supporting you in it. So thank you to everyone. We'll see you at the next session shortly.